My first job of the day will be to start cleaning up these glue ups. I'll use the disc sander to start, and then we'll see where it goes from there. I've cleaned up these beams with the disc sander, but they're still not necessarily straight or square. So the first thing I'm going to do is pick a surface and see how straight it is. Now I'm not using this as a level, I'm just using it to see if the board is flat, and it is. Second, I'm going to take my square and try to find a square edge on this board, and so far I'm seeing that this angle isn't quite right. So I'm going to check the other side. Maybe that other side will be better because I only need one right angle to do my milling. And I'm getting the same results on the other side. So what I need to do is shave down one side of this a bit more until it's right angle, and then I can get back to milling. Now I could do this with plane. Actually, the best way to do this would be to run it through a big old joiner, but I don't have one around here. I could also use a hand plane, but well, that's a lot of work too. Before I try to start sanding this down to make it square, I'm going to put a reference mark on my wood so that I can keep track of my progress. I don't need to take off too much wood to bring this back into square, so I've marked off about 1/16 of an inch here. So what I'll do is just sand down until I get to that edge, and then I'll recheck everything for square from there. Once I've confirmed I've got a square and straight edge, I want to mark it so that I don't lose that. This is the edge that I'll be using on the table saw up against the fence. Well, I got a few more to do. Now that I've hand planed this into a right angle on this side, I need to cut these to their final width. So I'm going to run them through my table saw next, and I should get a nice right angle on this corner. With the full thickness beams, I've got a small problem. This is a 10-inch saw which you can only cut about 3 1/4 inches deep. So I have to figure out how I'm going to cut something that's roughly 4 1/2 inches thick. I'm going to just start off by squaring the edge here, and then we'll get to the next step from there. And now I could try just flipping it over and cutting it from the other side, but you'll see the problem right away. The board isn't square on this side, so before I can do anything, I need to square up the other side of the log. So what I'm going to do is flip the board around, flip it up this way, and put a square cut on this side. And then I'll have to figure out how I'm going to deal with the rest of the wood there. I flip things around so that you can see them in the light, and you can see my problem. My saw is only going to cut to that depth, and then I'm left with this afterwards. So here's my right angle, but up here it's not. Same thing over on this side. So how do I get rid of the rest of this? Now there's a bunch of different ways to do this. One is I can use my sander and my hand planer to remove that. I can try to cut it by hand with a handsaw, but that's not only a lot of work, but a very difficult job. So what I'm going to do is actually, since I know this edge is flat and square, I'm going to mount a shim here on my table to lift me up above that so that I can cut off the remainder of this side. This table saw already has that feature installed, although I'm not sure this was the original intention for it, but it works that way. So if I just mount this here and then run my edge, my straight edge along here, then this lump on the side isn't going to matter. Let's go ahead and do that. That came out pretty nice. There's a little teeny bit of a lip here, which will come out with the sander. And now I just need to flip it over and I'll cut off the other corner and I'll have a nice square log. A 4.5 by 5.5 inch beam cut on a table saw that only cuts through 3 inches of material. The rails and columns are all milled up and square now. I think it's time for some celebratory bacon and pancakes. I ran a saw kerf down either side of the dados to make sure that they're well centered in the board. Now I'm just cleaning out the material that's left over, and you'll notice that since I'm probably going to use 3/4 inch panels for the back, this is a pretty wide gap. So what I'll end up doing is after I put the panel in, I'll drop in a shim to tighten them up and to fill that gap. The next step is to square up the ends of these boards, cut them to length, and then make the tenons. With one end squared off and cut to length, I can now measure and cut the other end to length. But remember to include the length of the tenons in the length of the board, or you'll have a problem later on. I'm set up to gang cut my 3 largest rails, and I'll be cutting the shoulders using a circular saw and this straight fence here. I'll do the same thing on the other 3 sides. Cutting the shoulders was fairly straightforward, but cutting the cheeks on the tenons, especially on pieces this big, is a little bit more tricky. To do that, I'm going to use the jig that we built last week. Right on the money. I'll do that over and over again until all these are done. I think that came out pretty nice. The rails are all done. That was a bit of work, but it wasn't too bad. I think I hear a hamburger calling my name, so I'm gonna go find it.